Good morning. My name is Suzanne Nelson. I'm a new mom based in Indianapolis, Indiana. Thank you so much to 2020 Mom for all of their amazing work and tireless efforts in putting this great forum together, and for giving me such a welcoming and incredible platform to share my twin sister's story. I'm honored for this opportunity, and I hope that her story can help other women and their families. I'm a twin, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my story and even more about my twin sister Melissa's story. Growing up, we did everything together and we were best friends. And as adults, we lived 30 minutes away from each other, which I always felt was way too far away. We attended the same college together, enjoyed many of the same hobbies and interests. We pretty much came as a package deal. So it didn't come to much of a surprise that we got pregnant within a week of each other at the end of 2019. I still remember the day that Melissa told me she and her husband Brian were expecting. She attached her pregnancy test to her dog's collar and had her run over to me to share the big news. We cried tears of joy and had permanent smiles on our faces all evening. Melissa couldn't wait to be a mom for the very first time, and I could not wait to watch her take on the most important and life-changing role of her life. Little did we know at the time, I was also newly pregnant. We couldn't have been happier to tell our parents, my mom's first grandchildren, arriving in September, and what we thought would be the happiest year of our lives, 2020. Only a few months later, we also found out that my brother and his wife were expecting their first as well, identical twin girls. 4 babies arriving within months of each other. How did we ever get this lucky? Melissa and I had wonderful pregnancies, very few complaints, no nausea or morning sickness, just your typical restless nights, swollen feet, and constant cravings for sweets. Melissa prepped the nursery, nested, read baby books, kept a baby journal, went on daily walks, and relied on prenatal yoga to keep her comfortable and healthy, all in preparation for her beautiful boy to arrive. Melissa was originally due September 12th, and as she neared her due date, there was little sign of her baby boy departing anytime soon. So at 40 weeks pregnant, her OB scheduled an induction date of September 17th. I delivered my baby girl via C-section on September 8th at 39 weeks, so we were all getting very antsy for Melissa's baby boy to make his entrance into the world. Melissa and I called and texted quite a bit leading up to her induction. She complained of the lack of sleep she was getting at night, trying to fit in naps during the day with little luck of restful sleep, anxious feelings that something may be wrong, wondering why she hadn't gone into labor yet. But the day had finally arrived. Melissa was induced early in the morning on September 17th. Experiencing a tiring and stressful labor, Melissa was determined to birth her son vaginally, and he was, about 24 hours later. Her son was finally born in the early hours of September 18th. We were overjoyed to hear the news and also the name that morning. Her baby boy was doing well, and Melissa was hanging in there, exhausted but so happy that her son had finally arrived. I tried not to text and call too often and relied on her husband to send most of the updates in hopes that Melissa was getting rest now that the labor and delivery were successfully over. The only text we exchanged during that time was a text she sent me, a picture of her son in his car seat, which read, "I'm a big boy now, ready to break out of the hospital and to finally head home 2 days after he was born." Melissa called me that evening around dinner time. She sounded worried and full of questions about getting her son on a sleep schedule, asking about breastfeeding and milk supply, latching and pumping. I tried to calm her worries, but I also didn't want to sugarcoat it, and I told her that these first couple of nights are tough, but it will get better, and that eventually her son will start to sleep for longer periods and that she'll get the hang of breastfeeding. But for now, it was just an exhausting wave that she and Brian would have to ride out. I encouraged her to try to sleep when the baby slept because it was likely the only time she'd get some rest. I told her to call me day or night with anything she needed, and that after I received my COVID test results, I'd be over that week to meet my new nephew and check in on her and Brian. The next day, a Monday, Brian called me, telling me that Melissa was fixated on her son's hips and hands, convinced that something was wrong. They had their son's first pediatrician appointment with their family doctor, who was also Melissa and Brian's new primary care physician, scheduled for 3 p.m. that afternoon. However, Brian saw how worried Melissa was and called to get the appointment moved up to 11 a.m. Brian asked if there was anything I could say to Melissa to help calm her fears. I tried telling her that my daughter experienced the same things and that it was all very typical of a newborn baby. I remember Brian talking to me as Melissa paced in the parking lot of their pediatrician's office, waiting for them to open. Her voice sounded so off. It was monotone, distracted, and quiet. Every time I talked to her on the phone, I felt like she wasn't really listening to me. She sounded tired, she was fixating and sounding paranoid. Their son's visit went just as planned. Everything was looking healthy and right on track. As their appointment was ending, Brian told the doctor that his wife hadn't been sleeping and seemed anxious and overly worried. He asked if there was anything that she recommended. She prescribed an antidepressant and a sleeping aid. Once they got home, I suggested that our mom go to Melissa's house to help her out with the baby. I had such a terrible feeling. I remember telling her that something seemed off. I was even Googling things like ways to talk with a new mother battling postpartum depression because I was so concerned that I wasn't saying the right thing or communicating with her properly. Once our mom arrived, she could tell Melissa wasn't doing well. My mom said it looked like she took a gray marker and had drawn circles under her eyes. She was so tired but fighting sleep, fixating on her son, getting down on the floor with him and trying to stretch out his hips and relax his fists. That afternoon, Melissa took our mom into her bedroom, and as they held hands, Melissa looked at her and said, "I can't do this." Our mom desperately tried to get more out of her, trying to get her to explain how she was feeling, but that's all she would say. That's all she would give us. At this point, she wasn't speaking much at all and seemed distant and anxious. She started to tell Brian and our mom that their son needed to be taken to the ER, which then turned into her saying, "I need to go to the ER." After questioning and trying to get more out of her with little response, Brian took her to the hospital. He told the doctor that Melissa hadn't slept since she gave birth to her son only a few days prior, and that she seemed overly anxious. Brian was asked to leave the room while she was evaluated by a doctor. She was assigned a social worker who would be communicating with Brian and our mom. They were told she'd be taken by ambulance to a behavioral health inpatient clinic. She would be kept there voluntarily and be seen by a doctor that could better evaluate her. Melissa stayed in the clinic a little under 48 hours. Brian was the only one that was able to see her during visitation hours. When Brian and Melissa spoke, he asked her how she was doing, tried to reassure her that everything was perfectly fine with their son and that they had everything at home under control. They just wanted Melissa to get better and to take as long as she needed in order to do so. On the last day, the doctor made his rounds and checked on Melissa. She told the doctor she was ready to go home and be with her baby. The doctor released her with no diagnosis, only a phone number to their facility, the hotline for Postpartum Support International, and for prescriptions for an antidepressant and a sleeping aid. When Melissa got home, she still seemed distant and distracted. The only time we spoke on the phone was when Brian called me and put her on speaker. Her voice still sounded so off, quiet and distant, barely saying a word, just replying with a yes or no to my questions. The next day, my parents and Brian reassured me that Melissa got some sleep the night before, and she was having a better day. She showered, put on some makeup, and sat out on their back patio while opening some baby gifts. Things were starting to look brighter, and we all believed that Melissa was feeling better. But looks can be deceiving. I received a phone call from Brian around 11 p.m. He was on speakerphone with Melissa. His voice sounded worried as he told me that Melissa left the house and had started to walk down their neighborhood. He quickly realized she was gone and saw her about 7 houses down, ran after her. As he approached her, he kept calling out her name, but she wouldn't turn around. He grabbed her arm to get her to stop walking, and as she turned around, she looked startled and confused. She was cradling her purse and her phone in her arms like a baby. Brian walked her back to the house, put her in bed, and then called me. I asked Melissa how she was feeling, if she felt safe, or if she was planning on leaving the house again. She reassured me in her quiet, distant voice that she was okay, and that she wasn't going to leave again. Before hanging up, Brian said he had one hand on the bassinet and one hand on Melissa. He wasn't going to let her go. I told her I'd be over first thing in the morning and that I loved her so much. Around 5 a.m., I received another call from Brian, frantic. Melissa had left the house again, but this time she took the car and left her phone behind. He was out driving around trying to find her. He thought that maybe she took the car and was driving to my house, so I ran downstairs, turning the lights on, and waited for her. As the minutes turned into hours, Brian wasn't having any luck finding her. I called Brian around 8 a.m. and I could hear my dad in the background. I asked if they found Melissa. Neither of them could give me an answer. And that's when I knew she wasn't okay, that we had lost her. Melissa had left the house at 4:38 a.m., drove to her favorite trail where she walked her dog almost every day, stumbling through a pitch black trail to the bridge about a half-mile down, and jumped, taking her own life almost exactly 1 week after her baby boy was born. September 25th, 2020 will forever be the worst day of my life and my family's life, changing us in ways we never thought possible. It wasn't until after my twin died that I had even heard of postpartum psychosis. We now know that this is what she was dealing with, likely triggered by days of sleep deprivation. When we replay every moment of that week, it all seems so obvious, but we had such little time with her to get her the help she truly needed. We all just wanted her to get some sleep. In everything that I had read, all of the baby classes I attended, and my conversations with my OB and nurses, there was never any mention of postpartum psychosis. And why didn't the behavioral health hospital doctor think to screen for this? Melissa's story has shed so much light on the gaps within women's postpartum care, and I owe it to her to help close these gaps so no other woman and her family has to endure a tragic loss like this. Without any doubt, Melissa would have done the same for me if roles were reversed. My family and I are planning to create a foundation in her honor to help spread awareness of maternal mental health conditions like postpartum psychosis, and to raise money to support the efforts of organizations like 2020 Mom and PSI to help fight for change to close these gaps. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to Joy and 2020 Mom for helping me share Melissa's story today at this amazing forum. I am so very grateful.